Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to make a start again. We do have a very special guest who's joining us who was not previously on the agenda, but you'll understand why he's an extremely important guest. And his name is Paul Chet Green. He's a member of the Antigua and Barbuda House of Representatives, a cabinet minister, and effectively the deputy prime minister of Antigua and Barbuda. And we're very privileged to have him speak to us today. Honourable Green, are you on the call? Can we?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much for your patience. The floor is open to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Bell Ribeiro-Addy, Member of Parliament and Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations, colleague parliamentarians, distinguished participants, brothers and sisters, greetings and best wishes. I sat in for the last hour or so and was thoroughly impressed with the quality of the presentations. I would not, because of the tearing of the clock, go into much of what has gone on, but allow me to make some brief presentations to you on this auspicious moment. I certainly and sincerely appreciate this invitation to say a few words to you at the closing of what has been a most successful engagement on the issues of reparatory justice. It was the late Ethiopian leader, Haile Selassie, who said, and I quote, "When African righteous people come together, the world will come together. This is our divine destiny," end of quote. The hosting of this conference with such high-level participants signals the quality of the momentum being experienced as we come together as a righteous people in our call for reparatory justice. I'm indeed heartened and full of hope that the global reparations movement is gaining tremendous traction and support for our call to European countries who have committed an international crime through chattel slavery and native genocide against the people of the Caribbean to make amends. Our struggle is not simple or simplistic reactionary call for money, as some would make it seem, or a desire to cast blame on current generations of Europeans whose governments and other institutions historically were active participants in the slave trade and chattel slavery, but a serious advocacy for justice and compensation through a process of atonement, dialogue, and alliance building. Our struggle for reparations is based on facts, and all fall within the framework of international law. It is a fact that an abundance of evidence, the European institutions and companies were owners and traders of enslaved Africans. Another fact is that the support was given for genocidal actions to be taken against indigenous communities in the Caribbean. Undisputable is the fact that European governments created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans. You can even feel free to fact check that the British government refused compensation to enslaved Africans with the ending of the enslavement, but very readily compensated slave owners at the emancipation for what they deemed the loss of property rights in enslaved Africans. As a member of the Caribbean Reparations Commission, my small country, Antigua and Barbuda, is committed to the process of national and international reconciliation. We have a sacred responsibility and duty to call for reparatory justice. We have a legal responsibility also to seek justice for a crime committed against humanity like many other nations before would have done. Over the years, Caribbean governments have sent strong demand letters to France, the Netherlands, Portugal, United Kingdom, and Spain to encourage a discussion regarding their responsibilities to descendants of African slaves as they have built their riches on the backs of free African labor. Be assured, colleagues, that we are not daunted by the pushback by the British government or their strong refusal to even engage us in a discussion about payment for reparations. We are confident that our claims are legally strong and fall within the parameters of international law. It is for this reason that CARICOM has been pushing for the former slave trading countries to participate in a summit to dialogue about atonement. The call for reparations and the perpetrators of a crime against humanity to be brought to justice will not, I repeat, the crime for reparations and for the perpetrators of a crime against humanity will not go away. Caribbean governments are unified in our efforts to seek justice and to bring our European governments to the table for further discussions on the issue. It is important to note that as governments of the Caribbean, we recognize the ongoing harm and suffering experienced by and resulting from chattel slavery as the primary cause for development failures in the Caribbean, and have developed a 10-point plan as a path to reconciliation, truth, and justice for victims and the descendants. This 10-point plan calls for, among other things, 1, a full formal apology. The healing process for victims and descendants of enslaved and enslavers requires, as a precondition, the offer of a sincere formal apology by the governments of Europe. Some governments, in refusing to offer an apology, have issued in place statements of regrets. But such statements do not acknowledge the crimes that have been committed and represent a refusal to take full responsibility for such crimes. We know that European nations have invested in the development of community institutions, such as museums and research centers, to prepare their citizens for the understanding of these crimes against humanity. On the flip side, there are no such institutions in the Caribbean where crimes against humanity were committed. Caribbean school teachers and researchers just simply do not have the same opportunities. Descendants of these crimes against humanity continue to suffer the disdain of having no relevant institutional systems through which their experience can be scientifically told. This crisis must be remedied within the Caribbean Reparations Justice Program. In 5th place, we look at the question of public health crisis. The African descendant population in the Caribbean has the highest incidence in the world, mark you, in the world, of chronic diseases in the forms of hypertension and type 2 diabetes. Europe has a responsibility to participate in the alleviation of this health disaster. The Caribbean Reparatory Justice Program addresses this issue and calls upon the governments of Europe to take responsibility for this tragic human legacy of slavery and colonization. In 6th place, illiteracy and eradication. 7th, African knowledge programs. A program of action is required to build bridges. Such programs include school exchanges, cultural tours, community artistic and performance programs, entrepreneurial and religious engagements, as well as political interaction, are required to neutralize the void created by the slave voyages. Psychological rehabilitation is the 8th point in the 10-point agenda. At number 9, technology transfer, very important, as our young people must have the right to technology advancements around the world. In the 10th place, we have debt cancellation. Caribbean governments that emerged from slavery and colonialism have inherited a massive crisis of community poverty and institutional unpreparedness for development. These governments still daily, engage in the business of cleaning up the social mess in order to prepare for development. The pressure of development has driven governments to carry the burden of public employment and social policies designed to confront colonial legacies. This process has resulted in states accumulating unsustainable levels of debt that now constitute their fiscal entrapment. This debt cycle properly belongs to the imperial governments who have made no sustained attempt to deal with the debilitating effects of colonial legacy. Support for the payment of domestic debt and cancellation of international debt are necessary reparatory actions. I'll conclude, colleagues, by sharing with you this outline of Caribbean Reparations Commission Today's engagement and dialogue among righteous people is a most positive and wholesome activity. Additionally, it points to the fact that reparatory justice is not just about money, as some would want to believe, but it's about development and human advancement. I will leave you with a quote from my Prime Minister, Augustine Brown, who, speaking to the Caribbean Reparations Commission Regional Symposium in 2019 on the topic of Western banking and colonialism, made the following comment, and I quote, "The labor cost alone of our forebears would have created a debt of approximately $2 trillion, which must be repaid. Reparations, therefore, and its compensatory mechanisms could be utilized as the new frontier to achieve equity, global peace, and unity." End of quote. As I close and wish you the best, the very best, in the remaining moments of this very important engagement, I would say, let every corner of our shared planet take note that today, righteous people are fast coming together. God bless all African descendants around the world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Chet Green, Deputy Prime Minister for Antigua and Barbuda. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence today. Our next speaker is as I was saying, Rita Remi-Judah, who is a co-clerk of the Quakers Reparations Working Group for Quakers in Britain. Quakers have very kindly given us this building and are doing a lot of work within their working group to move forward with reparations. Rita.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you, but that might be our fault.
Oh,
okay. We can see you now.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me to the plenary. This has been a life-affirming experience for me. This is my first APPG session, and it's been wonderful listening to people on their reparations journeys who are doing the work and the heavy lifting. Yeah, I hope that you've made new connections and you've connected with the old. I wonder whether we can put some energy into this. Some of the stuff has been heavy, but we're about to leave, and I want to channel this energy that we have as we go. So can we do, I mean, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'll have egg on my face. But can we do some call and response? So there's an election going to be taking place in the next couple of weeks on the other side of the Atlantic, but I'm taking some words from them. So I personally, I'm feeling fired up and ready to go. So can we do this? And those on Zoom, I want it to feel like you're in some kind of revival. I want your neighbors to feel like you're in a revival. So if you can say it with your chest, and we can say it really loudly. So if I say it fired up, you respond fired up. And if I say ready to go, you say ready to go. So can we do that so we can get the energy back in the room? So fired up.
Fired up.
Fired up. Everybody in the hallways as well. Ready to go.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Fired up.
Fired up.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Ready to go.
Well,
fired up. Ready to go.
Fired up.
We're fired up. We're fired up and ready to go. I don't know whether the hallway heard us. Like, I heard people on Zoom. I don't know whether the people in the hallway heard us. I will continue speaking because I can't see the hallway right now. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Can someone just please confirm that it's still working technically? Because I don't know. I can't see.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
I can hear you and see you online, but I don't know if they can hear me and see me in the hallway. In friend's house.
I'm not sure.
No, I can't see either. Bell, can someone confirm, please?
Can someone send a message?
Okay, great.
Can someone put it in the chat, please? We can see you and we can hear you.
Sorry, thank you.
Please
Perfect.
continue.
So I will continue. Yes. So my name is Margarita Remi-Judah. I am one of the two co-clerks of the Reparations Working Group with Quakers. You will have seen and heard from my other half this morning, Anne Morgan. You may also have seen and heard from both committee and the working group members, as well as staff from British Quakers, in the faith breakout session, in the education faith breakout session, and also possibly at lunchtime and over coffee. So we are here. We stand with you. We are here for the distance as well. I'm trying to do two things as far as this conversation is concerned. One is to talk about how Quakers are implementing both institutional and policy change in ourselves, and also as co-clerks to the reparations working group, both Anne and I have a deep conviction that reparations has to be more than virtue signaling. It has to be followed with concrete action, which is in alignment with the conference. So what I will do is talk to how we are making changes both institutionally and policy-wise as Quakers. We will make the changes within ourselves and in our church. And with that, we will start trying to make a difference to the world as best as we can. So what does that look like for Quakers? The first thing, as everybody's talked about, is the apology. We are working towards an apology, but to make an apology, we have to actually understand what we're apologizing for. So over the course of 2025, we'll be going to all our different meetings and helping them on their reparations journey. We will be sponsoring courses from our Quaker College Woodbrook to be able to help people understand. And as Lord Gifford said, uncomfortable conversations. We will be engaging in those uncomfortable conversations because we are a community as a collective endeavor, what we believe is reparations to be. And that's what we're trying to do. We are changing how we work. What does that look like? We're decolonizing our grant making. So we're making it less onerous, less prescriptive, and more trusting of our Quaker brothers and sisters in the global majority, because we think that's the best thing to do. So that's our staff that are doing that. We are learning our history. We want to remember, we do not want to forget, and we do not want to repeat. So part of that is creating a searchable database that can be peer reviewed and that can be shared with different members of our communities, and both our Quaker communities and Black and Brown communities, so that they can see, especially the children, but adults as well, they can see what their ancestors did to contribute to whatever Quakers have done as well. So we didn't do it by ourselves, we did it with you. And in so doing, we hope to embed that in the education system and possibly add pride for people who are Black and British, because they're the ones that helped build this. We're talking about other things as well. So we're talking about taking care of the people who are around us. So the historians that we're working with, they're going through a really tough time. A lot of the history that they're talking to is very, can be traumatic, and we understand that. So part of the whole engagement with historians is that we will have a way to make sure that they're taken care of in terms of pastoral care, peer review support. A lot of the history is disruptive, so we understand that. Even cybersecurity support is what we look at, protection for them, because we do not want them being attacked, and we want them to be whole and feel that the engagement with us has been beneficial at the end of the experience. As well as academics, both Anne and I have sometimes found that academic institutions can be quite extractive. So we're trying to establish principles of engagement in terms of pay scales, language, and also manners of engagement. So that's something we're doing in 2025. And we're also trying to listen to as many people and as far as and as wide as possible. So thus far, we know that Quakers were involved across the continent of Africa. The following countries that we know are Ghana, Gambia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. We also know the Quakers were involved in the Caribbean. So that includes countries like Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, and Tortola. So we will be reaching out where we know that we've been involved, and we'll be talking to the communities. As we've been told, we will center the communities and we will hear from them to understand what they believe reparations are going to be. The last thing that we are doing, well, apart from speaking to our brothers and sisters in the Americas, so this is an Atlantic conference, we are speaking to Quakers in the Americas to see what their initiatives are, to make sure that what we do will complement what they do complements what we do, and vice versa. And we're also working with CRAF. I think Anne mentioned that. So that's Church Reparations Action Forum of Jamaica. So we'd be looking for other partners as far as the faith environment is concerned. We hope to have a conference in 2026, and we invite you to that. So that will cover the history that we've been doing and also the theological research. We hope that you feel that you can be our accountability partners, because we want to get this right. We will make mistakes, and we hope that in our failings, you'll be able to tell us what we're doing wrong, and we can course correct accordingly. And we will do our best to get this right. What I would like to say is that there are many takeaways from this conference. I'll just go through a list of the things that I'm going to share with my community. So the first one is thanks to Bell. Literally, you are a giant. So thank you for this conference. We are looking to make sure that what we do and when we share our resources is make it sustainable going forward. So for the APPG, for Black Lives Matter. So we'll be working on that. So to make it something that can be long lasting as far as our relationship with you is concerned. I've heard from people, I've heard from specialists here to be wary of both movement and elite capture of the reparations movement. I've heard that states cannot be the only forum for reparations. Laws need to be fit for purpose and not just legitimizing conquest. I've learned that iron sharpens iron, and we should look for that. And we should be kind in how we engage with each other, but we should do the best that we can to be better at what we're doing. I've learned about language. Thank you, Edwina Pert, because she taught us that before I came to this conference. So we talk about enslaved people. We talk about the trafficking of enslaved people. We do not use the word slave. We do not use the word chattel slave, trafficking, chattel slavery. We do not dehumanize people. We humanize them and we center them. I'll talk to my community about recognizing allies. So some folks don't hear us unless we have a white person next to us or a white person in front of us. And they ask us why we're shouting, because you're not listening and you're not hearing us. So I will communicate that accordingly. I've heard about the 29 local reparations commissions in the US and the others. So I will communicate that to both meetings in the UK and in North America. I will understand and share that it's a multi-layer, multidisciplinary groupings that have to come in alignment. And those living with a legacy of enslavement, colonialism, and economic exploitation are the ones that should be shaping the laws, and will be looking to support in so doing. I've learned that civil litigation is an effective way of reparations. I've learned so much. And I will also talk about the conflation of charity, business, philanthropy, and reparations. How reparations has to be defined by those who are harmed, and not there's no singular voice for a vision. It is a shared vision and a shared journey. Sister Esther, I love your passion. Keep on being you. And thank you, everybody, for your time and your passion. And I leave you in friendship and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita, and thank you so much actually for taking us through a lot of what was discussed over the conference. That was amazing. That was brilliant. If there was somebody that was listening, it was definitely you, and you are not even in the room, so no one else has an excuse. Now we're going to go to our next speaker, who is an extremely important person, well, to me, definitely. And because actually in 2022, October, he came to see me at Brixton Town Hall in Lambeth. And he said to me, why have you not had a conference on reparations in what is the mother of empire? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, next year I want to come back and I want you to have a conference. And I said, okay. And I like to think I do as my elders tell me to do, most of the time at least. And you know, I did listen to him, and I made sure that myself with Secretariat, we put it together last year. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us online last year, but this year we are very pleased to have Dr. Julius Garvey, who is a human rights activist, a surgeon, a medical professor. He's also the son of the Jamaican national hero and Pan-Africanist visionary Marcus Garvey. Dr. Garvey.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful.
Lovely to see you, Dr. Garvey.
Thank you for having me to this conference, and thank you for that introduction. You've carried out your duty very well. This is an excellent conference, and I'm very pleased to be able to participate. Um, uh, my talk is basically building a just and prosperous society, reparations. Reparations is about reparatory justice, which means repair of the damage done to the victim and also repair of the system that caused the damage, so that the existing condition of the victim will not continue indefinitely and cannot recur at any time in the future. The damage that has been done as the result of 400 years of the enslavement of our people and 150 years of colonization and globalization, which is another word for imperial domination by a unified, militarized group of countries constituting the global north, which aims to dominate the majority of humanity. We, as African people, represent 1.5 billion globally, and the colonial legacy has left us in a structural trap where we produce cheap raw materials for export and consume the industrialized output from the global north. And through pseudo-development aid, there is a transfer of outmoded technology that guarantees us that we can never develop our resources adequately as we are persistently at the bottom of the value chain. And so our socio-economic exclusion as significant global entity persists. Because of the persistence of systems created during colonization, we continue to face three deficits. One, a food deficit. 80% of the food consumed in Africa is imported. And this also is in the colonies, ex-colonies, for example, in the Caribbean. Number two, we face energy deficits. Nigeria, one of the largest exporters of crude oil and gas, imports 100% of its gasoline and petrochemicals. Angola, which is also another producer and exporter of crude oil, imports 80% of its gasoline and petrochemicals. And third, we also have a manufacturing deficit where we export raw materials and import high-value, high-cost manufacturing goods, again from the global north. Our former colonizers who created the systems after the Bretton Woods Agreement, such as the United Nations, where we have no voice in the Security Council, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, the Bank for International Settlements, and the G7, all of which run the world for the benefit of the global north. Africa was the breadbasket for Europe during colonial times. But as soon as we began to become independent from the 50s forward, Europe decided that they had a food security problem. So at the Treaty of Rome in 1955, a common agricultural policy was developed, which heavily subsidized the European farmers to grow corn, wheat, maize, soy, etc. This put the African farmers out of business. That policy still exists today. That's why the Ukraine is such a big exporter of grain. So we consume what we don't produce, and we produce what we don't consume. And we are at the bottom of the value chain with these structural trade deficits relative to food, energy, and manufacturing. With weaker currencies relative to the euro and the dollar, all imports come at a high price. So we import inflation. Our governments then have to subsidize sensitive items in terms of food and energy. Our banks then borrow from the World Bank and other lenders. This creates debt, and the national fiscal space is geared towards paying off the debt. This is debt slavery. There is therefore little room in the economy for infrastructure building, high-end manufacturing of raw materials, and long-term development planning to reduce poverty and increase prosperity. And so we run faster and faster up the down escalator. This is the colonial socio-economic structural trap that is still being steered from the north, that must be transformed to produce a just transition to equity and to restore our human dignity. it's not just about a dollar figure. There's no dollar figure that could be compensate for the death, the suffering, and the dehumanization. As a matter of fact, as far as the dollar figure is concerned, the United States spends a staggering $1.5 billion annually on its military. And you can add the NATO budget to that, and the figure is even more obscene. And this creates a war machine that makes war on nations and people in areas such as Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, Palestine, Jordan, and of course, the list can be continued. All of this to perpetuate the domination by the global north over the majority of the people of the world. This system of extractive capitalism and scientific materialism that gave us slavery, colonialism, and globalization is continued by a highly organized and militarized group with enormous economic, scientific, and political resources that not only seeks world domination, but population control and reduction, digitization of everything, including a new form of money, central bank digital currency, which is programmable to regulate our behavior, censorship, as we saw with Ta-Nehisi Coates in his interview on the station in the United States, robotics, artificial intelligence, cyborgs, pandemics to create fear, because the creation of fear is their stock in trade. What we need is an international tribunal on reparations, because individual nations create laws that circumvent the issue. So I second the statement by Professor Justin Hansford earlier on, that we must have an international tribunal, very much like the Nuremberg Tribunal or the International Court of Justice, because this is a global issue. It's not simply an issue of one nation versus another nation, but the whole world is in danger. It's in danger by a war machine that wants to dominate humanity. So my perspective on reparations is that we must create this tribunal based in the United Nations and UNESCO, and it has to deal with the whole problem comprehensively as a systematic abuse of humanity by systems that are inherently inhumane and are based on a materialistic concept of an understanding of the world, and leaves out our humanity, which is based also on our spirituality as people, and which is what really unites us instead of divides us. So this conference is excellent in terms of moving in that direction, and I hope that we do move together towards that international tribunal that is absolutely necessary before the world is destroyed by nuclear weapons and continued wars. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today, Dr. Garvey, and for your continued leadership in this area. As you can see, we are going on for time, but I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker, Professor Augustine Gus John, who needs very little introduction. He is a Grenadian-born writer, education campaigner, consultant, lecturer, researcher, and he's worked in the fields of education, policy, management, and international development. He is an all-round elder in our community, and we are very privileged to hear from you today.
Well, it's good to see that you are all still here. And it's important that we are all still here. This is the continuation of a very important conversation. and it's one that we need to take into our homes, our workplaces, our networks, pretty much anywhere we have a presence, and I'll go into that a bit more in a minute. There's a lot to say, and I don't have too much time to say it in, but I want to just share about 3 or 4 things. First of all, I want to thank Bell for all the energy she's put into organizing this, she and her team. I want to thank my dear sister Esther for the leadership that she's given us all these years, and particularly for the energy she brought to straightening us out this morning. And of course, my other panel members. Where's Kofi? Oh, there he is, yes. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is this. Sister Esther said this morning that it's important for us to remember that the reparations agenda encompasses the African diaspora, Caribbean, North America, wherever, but also our brothers and sisters on the continent itself, and we who are in this metropolitan area. I think it's very important that we understand that, particularly in calling out that quite awful man, T.S. Summer, and understanding how we organize, galvanize, and use our power to call him out and make the British state do what they should do. That's critically important. And in doing that, we need to build upon our advances of the past. We did build a black supplementary school movement. We did build the black working class movement in schooling and education. And remember that while we were doing that, the far right in this country was hard at work. Hard at work, harassing our children in school and on the way to school, harassing families in their homes. Some of you are not as old as me, but you have had an experience of nigger hunting, which the Metropolitan Police talked about very nonchalantly a few decades ago. You knew about Paki bashing and the work of the National Front, Column 88, the British National Party, and the rest of it. Now, what is interesting about all of that is that we who had come from the Caribbean and from South Asia, and were actually working in this place to build communities, including communities of resistance, because of the attacks on our fundamental human rights, were doing so while we are also engaging with the workplace. The trade unions were not particularly concerned about what we were doing in our communities. They were rightly concerned about conditions of work and wages and health and safety and so on. But in addition to all of that, and the racism that we were experiencing from among trade union white members themselves, we had to deal with the police brutality and harassment on the streets. We had to deal with the extortionate housing landlords and the rest of it. We had to deal with the National Health Service. We had to deal with so many other areas of our lives relentlessly. But we managed to do that because we had some sense of purpose, and particularly a determination not to let this racist system defeat us. It is that same determination and those same modes of organization that we need to bring to this reparations agenda, right here in this place. Because you see, we can't have conversations amongst ourselves as mainly adults when our children in schools haven't a clue what we're talking about, when youths in our communities are disinterested in what we're talking about. And so the repair has got to be in relation to ourselves, but also in relation to how we prepare our children to live in this fractured society. And it's a major task. In 1939, the British government sent the Moyne Commission, Lord Moyne, to the Caribbean to investigate the 5 years of unrest, relentlessly, that took place in the islands of the Caribbean between 1934 and 1939. They completed the report at the end of 1939, but it was suppressed. It was so damning, it was suppressed until after the Second World War. For two reasons. The British believed that if it was published, less of us would want to come and join them in the war effort, and that it would be used by Adolf Hitler as propaganda against the British. Two short quotes about what that commission said. Members of the commission asserted that the resistance that disrupted the Caribbean was not a spontaneous uprising with a lofty cause, but rather a demand from the laboring class for better and less restrictive lives. And the report revealed that for the laboring population, more subsistence was increasingly problematic. Mere subsistence was increasingly problematic. The conditions were the result of institutional barriers that sought to maintain the colonial power structure. And that is what Professor Arthur Lewis, who would be the Nobel laureate from St. Lucia, wrote about in his pamphlet for the Fabian Society called Labor in the West Indies. And if you haven't read it yet, do get it and read it. And above all, put in an envelope to send to Keir Starmer. The man is ignorant, he's ill-informed, he is racist, and he doesn't give two monkeys pink backsides about what black people are experiencing in this society. Okay, I don't have very much more time. Let me just say this. We have to remember, my friends, that while we were building our communities of resistance and resisting racism, including from neo-fascists, the state was piling on oppression upon us. And when in the late 1980s it started the PREVENT program, we were alerting activists like myself. We were alerting the state to the domestic terrorism our communities were suffering from the far right, from white ferret-eyed racists. They did not want to know. But then some bombings took place in London, and all of us, and after the 9/11 stuff in New York, and all of a sudden, there was a huge PREVENT program instituted by the government. And that PREVENT program concentrated almost exclusively on terrorism by Muslim people. So young children who had nothing at all to do with politics, never mind terror, were being dragged into police stations, or their parents were being fingered by Channel and PREVENT, etc., because they were making very, very ordinary remarks about what was going on around them. So the point I'm trying to make is this. In an article I wrote for the Jamaica Gleaner, I said you can't plant corn and expect to reap cassava. So all of that stuff that was going on culminated in what we saw on the streets of England after those children were murdered in Southport a couple of months ago. And that brings me to my final point. What is the responsibility of the government in relation to that? It's not just to put them people away for 13 months, 20 months, 13 years, or whatever it is. You don't deal with that issue, that systemic issue, by simply banging up people for as long as you like. The fact of the matter is, as some of you would have heard me say before, that the government has never attended to the question of what you do about the schooling and education system when you were a colonial power, an imperial power, dealing with the barbarism that goes with empire, and treating people around the world who were not white European in the way that you did. Because you weren't doing something just to them, you were doing something about your own white population. You can't go around with that barbarity around the world and not be affected by it yourself. It helps to define who you are, white privilege, white supremacy, and the rest of it, even when you yourselves, as a result of being working class and white, are being treated in the most disgusting ways by the elites within the society. But that has never been on the agenda. The issue of how the schooling and education system can be structured in order to counteract and correct and fix and repair all that damage of colonialism and imperialism was not on the agenda. What happened instead was we were in focus. Multicultural education, learning about the cultures of the people from Jamaica and Grenada and Bangladesh and so on and so forth. But as Sivanandan so rightly said, learning about the cultures of other people doesn't equip you with dealing with the racism of your own. And it is important for us at this stage, now that the government is doing the Labour government is doing its curriculum review, to insist that that gets on the agenda of the curriculum. Keir Starmer has got one thing in his head and one thing only, is the Holocaust, and making sure that everybody who breathes could tell you everything about the Holocaust. All right? That one Holocaust. He's not concerned about the MAFA, the African Holocaust. And we have to make him concerned about that, because its impact is still affecting daily our children, the way they're taught, what they are taught, and how it impacts upon their lives and their life chances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor John. As you can see, we are way over our time. And that does mean that when we do finish, you may have to leave very swiftly.
Last year, amongst the actions we agreed to work on, so that the conference, is not just a talking shop, but one which spells out action, was to work towards a conference to commemorate the anniversary of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference that actually saw white supremacy racists sitting in Berlin and carving up Africa, which has still defined what is the landscape, in Africa today. And one of the major crimes of colonialism that we are still living with. Because what really effectively that meant was dividing indigenous African nations and communities, app, fracturing indigenous community unity, and therefore being able to impose literally the fascist rule of white supremacy upon them, and dictating that borders, would not change. So in effect, these borders have become, Bantustan prisons, where the indigenous, communities are compelled to live divided lives, to the point that, you might find somebody's, bedroom in Togo and find the person's living room, in Ghana. Literally, that is what we have. So the consequences of the genocidal consequences of the Maangamizi, as we call it, are still living with us. And fortunately, we got in touch with friends in Germany who were prepared to co-organize, to assist us, in organizing this. And one of the groups that emerged out of this conference, Paris, then took that up to work with people like Laura, Dr. Tobias Mueller, who's up there, to get friends in Germany to work with us towards this. Now, this brings me to one point, that it is actually difficult for some of our Africans to come to terms with this, right? But the fact of the matter is that as the European elites were busy carving up Africa, colonizing and terrorizing our people, there were also, yes, significant numbers of European freedom fighters who opposed colonization, who were also, terribly persecuted. The likes of Rosa Luxemburg, who led the anti-imperialist movement in Germany, were actually assassinated, And this is something that we have to, if we want to be true to what it is, then we have to acknowledge this. And this is why those who say they are allies of ours in the fight for reparatory justice also have people to look up to, right? Because those people supported the leadership of colonized peoples, coined the phrase, workers and colonized peoples unite, and worked under the leadership of colonized people in certain respects, in the anti-imperialist struggle. So that is still a tradition that we expect our allies, to follow, so that those who are trying to buy their way to co-opt the reparations movement today and mislead it, to destroy its revolutionary essence, we need to challenge them with examples of others. This is one of the reasons why this conference in Berlin is of great importance, and what the likes of Laura have been doing about it, she will have a few words to say.
To what Kofi said, that was agreed on at the conference included also the principle of a so-called effective occupation that allowed to create the establishment of formalized political governance through bureaucratic structures, police force, and military conquest. With the introduction of this new strategy of occupation, of any forms of anti-colonial resistance were even more brutally crushed down. And I think that adds upon especially the crashing down of resistance movements. So Kofi and Kobina approached me last year and emphasized that the legacy of this event persists until today, and that we have to address this properly in the heart of where this happened originally. So we invite you to the APPG, the Africa and Europe People-to-People's Plenary Pairs Action Dialogue Internationalist Forum for Reparatory Justice, in order to have a shared reparatory dialogue on the legacy of the Berlin Conference and to bring the conversations of today and of last year's conference also to other places and other communities. So we will meet in Berlin to discuss not only the legacy of the Berlin Conference, but also ways forward with plenary pairs in panels and workshops for a whole weekend, and we would like to have you there as well. So the exact date will be published on our website, and more information you will also find on the website. The website is berlin-repairs.de. And yeah, with that, I'm just very excited to welcome you all in Berlin for another important event in the struggle for reparatory justice. And also please get in touch with me or any other persons that were mentioned for further information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kofi and Laura. I'm now going to ask very quickly the chairs of the various panels to come forward. Yes. Just to give us a very, very quick report back on each panel, if you could keep it to. Oh no, just on your, just on your one. Chairs, I can see some of you. Please.
All right, I'm just going to give you a quick one in regards to restitution and culture and repairing our heritage. Basically, we were honored enough to have a Rudo Sitkoff, Onyekachi Wambu, Baku Kofi in the room, but a part of what they contributed was that we came to an understanding that restitution, as mentioned earlier, is more than just the returning of artifacts. It's the recovering of a history, of a people, and an understanding of the culture, even more so the culture. And so really what the takeaways are, as us as a community, is how are we going to actually establish what that culture looks like? What that culture looks like and how that culture is going to go forward. Now, in order for us to do that and to understand restitution in its true form, we have to then be renegotiating how we are navigating that experience between the histories of those artifacts that we are asking back to be reunited with the people. But then even more so, what about us as diasporans here? Esther, I beg you pass me the Manila. The Manila. What are we doing as cultures here? How many people know what this is? And it's a Manila. I'll just cut to the chase. It's a Manila. And it was used as an exchange in currency for Africans to enter into slavery. So this is what they used to sell us as Africans. There's a whole conversation to be had with this, which we will take online, which will be accompanied by Esther and Decolonizing the Archive at another time. But I guess what I'm saying to you as a community and to all of those who participated in the conversation today is we have to look beyond the idea of what we are being told restitution is. It is a recovery of self, a recovery of our memory, a recovery of our culture. But we need to also identify what that culture is and what it looks like in terms of us embarking into the future together. Thank you. That's it.
I'm gonna, and Jerome, when you're ready.
Any questions?
Yep.
It's so quick. All right, I was chairing the panel on reparations, international relations and conflict. And we had a very experienced panel highlighting different perspectives from state, non-state, civil society and grassroots perspectives. But the key priorities that came out of the panel were to more clearly define Pan-African reparations by the right to security and the right to sovereignty, highlighting that there is a new scramble for Africa and her resources, which is a violent one, defined by the racist diktats of just transition, as has been seen in acts like the Critical Raw Materials Act, which was passed in the European Parliament to dictate how minerals and resources will be extracted from around the world, to welcome and support the efforts for sovereignty of states like the Alliance of Sahel States and its attempt at security from international law perspectives, such as the right to self-determination and the right to be free from colonial domination, expose and tell the truth about the complicity of Western powers and Western taxpayers in funding so-called jihadist terrorists who are being planted in our communities to murder and assassinate our communities and cause destabilization, and to respect the efforts of communities elsewhere, particularly for autonomy and sovereignty and of stopping the harm, to build practical examples of how reparatory justice is being achieved around the world. That's it.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. If I've got a moment, I'll read the quote that actually started off our panel discussing this. Quite brief, because that's what we asked our speakers to interact with. It's from a book called Rethinking Reparations by the Femi Taiwo. Excellent book. So, in Freedom Dreams, Robin D.G. Kelly takes up a similar perspective. After a historical analysis of many eras of reparations campaigns in the United States, he concludes that it was never entirely or even primarily about money. The demand for reparations was about social justice, reconciliation, reconstructing the internal life of Black America, and eliminating institutional racism. This is why reparations proposals from Black radical movements focus less on individual payments than on securing funds to build autonomous Black institutions, improving community life, and in some cases, establishing a homeland that will enable African Americans, African descent, to develop a political economy geared more toward collective needs than toward accumulation. So we started with that quote, and we asked our panel, which was a mix between local authority, we had MPs as well, and also thinkers and writers, to think about how we could move towards building that society and what that has looked like in their own work, in the idea of dreaming what reparation looks like. Really, 3 takeaways I would say. At local government level, we need to stay more in touch because there are excellent motions going forwards from the Greens, the SNP, Labour, we're getting there, I guess. And then also MPs do incredible work. And then internationally, the point I would say as well, we heard from Global African Congress about the work at the UN recently and the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and that incredible work as well. So I think that was the main takeaway, was really to stay more in contact. How can we stay a lot more in contact to bring together that local political work, nationally and internationally?
Thank you very much.
Good evening. So in our panel of discussion, it was about educating for reparation, addressing historical gaps, and advancing Pan-African perspective. So the discussion aimed to address the lack of information about enslavement and colonialism in the national curriculum. We have highlighted how educational reform from a Pan-African perspective can illuminate historical injustice that are often omitted or represented in the mainstream. We have talked about taking back the narrative from our own perspective and from our own eyes, especially rethinking and controlling the language and the terminologies that we are using within our communities. We also talk about using science evidence to support the historical achievements that have been omitted. We have acknowledged some systematic oppression in the higher education system and the lack or the limited funding opportunity for the youth and the graduate to access to education. So what are the takeaways we can have from this discussion? It's about to reinforce that reparative education requires a collective commitment from institutions, government, and individuals, because the role of education in reparation is not only the duty of those directly affected, but also of the broader global community to acknowledge, support, and advocate for redress. So we need to create some practical pathways of implementing reparation through, through specific education policies, public programs, and community-led initiatives that serve as model for reparative actions, especially from a Pan-African perspective. Thank you.
Blessings. So on our panel, we started off talking about reparations, and actually the name of the panel, because it was labeled as climate equity, when really it should have been spoken about, reparations and environmental justice. And the big initial part was talking about how is it that it's being isolated? How is it that we're talking about climate in an isolated way, as though humans are not also part of it, and as though, this struggle can only be isolated around the climate, when really it's an anti-colonial struggle that dates back hundreds of years. We also had a problem with the name climate equity, because this frames it around the monetary issue, tries to frame it around this question of loss and damage and climate debt and a monetary conversation, rather than a question around power and a question around land and a need, and the fact that right now there are indigenous nations and indigenous peoples that are taking reparations into their own hands by actually taking back their lands, as is being seen in the Alliance of Sahel States. And so we see that, one of the big questions here is that the reparatory process is actually a process of national and social liberations. It's a process of self-determination, sovereignty, and about the respect for the indigenous nations that already exist in the territory, like the Mosi, like the Akan, like the Beto communities that extend beyond also the colonial frontiers. That is also a problem of environmental justice, right? The third question that we spoke about very importantly was the fact that the fact that it's isolated around this monetary conversation means that also we have people that Kofi correctly labeled, for example, people like Akufo-Addo being traitorous with regards to the reparations case, because they're going in and saying that they're doing the reparations conference, as right now they're instilling military bases, US military bases inside the airports in Ghana. And so we're seeing that territory is being ceded, for them to continue having control over the lands and over the territories, to continue pillaging and exploiting the people and the African indigenous nations. And yet they are sitting and talking about reparations. And so finally, we spoke about the fact that the environmental movement here is useless if it is not also talking about taking back its own lands here, because if not, they will be the first and are being the first to call upon militarized fascist, eco-fascist violence that is imposed upon the global south and the rest of the colonized world.
So our panel talked about decolonising faith institutions and NGOs. And Bell is telling me we're very tight for time, and I always do what Bell tells me, so I'm just going to tell you one thing that came of it. It was an incredible discussion, really wide-ranging. The audience really got involved in the discussion, and we realised that there's an awful lot happening. Not as much as we need to be happening, but there's an awful lot happening across all parts of the UK. How do we know about it? How do we know about it? Does anybody here know that at Glasgow University you can now do a Master's in Reparative Justice and you can get it funded? But that's just one example that I happen to know about. But there are so many things happening. So one of the suggestions was that we somehow get the funding together to pay somebody properly to archive all of this, so that there's one place that you can go to that you know what's happening in the reparations movement. And that would be a really practical step that would help everybody involved in it and beyond that. Was that quick enough?
Thank you very much. And we are now going to go to our very, very final speaker, Sister Esther, who's going to take us home.
Okay, thank you. I recognize the time issue. It's always the time issue, and clearly we need more time, and we have to ensure that we have more regular gatherings so that we can continue to hear from each other and try and harmonize our different perspectives. So I just wanted to close out with some thoughts around the way forward. In particular, taking into consideration everything everyone has said, I just wanted to bring us back to what the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide Ecocide campaign has been lobbying for. And this is a long-standing demand going back to the early 90s, in fact, which incorporates, in my view, a lot of what I've been hearing that people are saying they want. So the idea of a commission of inquiry, which we call the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice, and also we've heard about a UN tribunal, okay? In Lord Gifford's opinion on legal opinion on reparations from 1993, he mentioned that there is no existing court that can adjudicate the African reparations case. And he likened our experience to that of Jewish people who wouldn't go to Nazi courts after the Jewish Holocaust. They had to set up a special tribunal, okay? And I'm using that framing to say that in the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, we have long had those ideas. And that is why we have been promoting the Ubuntu Gotla People's International Tribunal for Global Justice, because it's also known that these big UN commissions often don't provide access to justice. They are inadequate, okay? And they don't offer, they're very political mechanisms in terms of whose voices get heard, who are considered to be victims and survivors, you know, what the remedies are. And that is why people's tribunals have become a more recent way of trying to get access to justice that is along the lines of what peoples define as being the crimes against them and also the repair. So we've had these answers here in the movement, the International Social Movement for African Reparations, that has been working with representatives and movements from within the wider internationalist People's Reparations International Movement, okay? And this idea around an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry has taken into fact consideration that we know a lot about commissions of inquiries, truth commissions, what works, what doesn't work. There's been about 100 of them. And we have been doing that research as unfunded grassroots activists who a lot of us have legal experience and training. But we have decided to align our legal skills with our movements and with our communities, okay? So that is what we know. And so the idea of a commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice is not like any other truth commission or commission of inquiry. It is a unique, bespoke model that has taken on board what the weaknesses are in the existing models. However, because we work at an international level, there are also inspiration and synergy that we try and forge with our cousins across the seas. So the mention of what's been going on in America has been happening today. People should know that those local commissions, a lot of them are trying to implement something called HR 40 and SR 40, House bill and a Senate bill, on a commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans Act. That's what it is driving a lot of that work. And so we need an act here in the British Houses of Parliament that can enable us to take forward that proposal around an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. We have ideas around a mandate, but we know that we have to consult the people. That's why you need to be at the table. And what we want, we're hoping that we can utilize the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations for. I know I've got to close. Just to say three final points. First thing, taking inspiration from the African Emancipation Day Reparations March Committee and the slogan, education is preparation for reparations. We all have a responsibility to continue to self-educate ourselves, our families, our communities, our colleagues, and so forth. We must do that. Secondly, we have to raise our legal consciousness. And this is around the views and ideas that we as individuals, groups and peoples have towards law, legality, justice, what is lawful, what is unlawful. We're not going to go very far if we keep using our enslavers and colonizers' visions of law. Okay? We have to restore our people's law as African people. And the two systems are there, already in operation. I would say continue the discussions in your families around building your case. The case has not yet been made. States have a particular case that they are making, and I've said something on that before. But you, each and every one of you in here, you have your family case that must be put there as part of our overall people's case. This is your struggle, your movement. Politicians, academics, even us as activists, individual activists, are not going to win this struggle for you. Then we can lobby MPs, okay, around our own connection to this issue. And of course, there's a template letter. I have already suggested, can we have the letter amended so that it recognizes also the demand for a commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. I would say we need to have more action around the atonement and reparations motions for Britain's role in the transatlantic enslavement of African people that we had passed Lambeth, Islington and Bristol City Council. And then finally, I've already mentioned the legislation to actually implement the Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. Thank you. And of course, to support, I must say this, to support the development and the strengthening of this all-party parliamentary group for African reparations. The fact that we have this space, we must not take for granted, because everybody's position in it is vulnerable. But it can only be the space that we want it to be when we at the community organize to also support and challenge our elected officials to stay aligned with our communities. Thank you.
I cannot let this end without one specific request to the Quakers as a reparatory justice demand. Can you commit yourself to the fact that the last Saturday and Sunday, every October, we should have this place for our conference? Free of charge.
Quickly, because we do very much need to leave this building. So thank you to those that have supported us, the Quakers, the Open Society Foundation, Kofi Afrique, Black Socks, Operation Black Vote, Christian Aid and the Society of Black Lawyers, our Secretariat, of course, Afford and Stop the Maangamizi, and specifically Onyekachi, Kofi and Sister Esther, and of course, my fantastic team who do not complain and just do as I ask, even if it takes all day, and of course the volunteers that help support us today, and all of those, the speakers that took their time, those that woke up very early in the morning in different parts of the world to be able to speak to us, and of course to all of you for taking your time to come here today. I have one final ask of you, other than to remain committed to this cause, and that is to leave this building very, very swiftly so that they allow us to come back. Thank you very much. We will be providing clips and reports so that we can move forward. Thank you so much for your time, and please have a safe journey home. Thank you, Jendo.